Testing. Good evening out here at all.
I'm very good. Do you want? Yes, of course. I don't know. Yes, I do.
You and Ghana.
Yes. Oh, Ghana is so
take one of these ones. Say two thumbs up. Yeah, that's fine. What's the name? Yeah,
Yeah.
Nine minutes. Live to the nation.
Are we sitting or standing?
Welcome, Georgie. We're all good.
Outrageous if you didn't stand so we get to see the full embrace of that
Well, I'm too short. So if I stand, you're all going to get up there and I'm going to be bloody
A special good evening to Winston Peters.
Australia, the big winner, and Kiwis lead into mate.
And I came in from the airport on a packed airport bus.
Really?
Yeah. Okay. No.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the greatest NZ live political podcast in the world, The Working Group. Hosted by beloved left-wing broadcaster Comrade Bomber Bradbury, with the best political panel in New Zealand media, reviewing the week, setting the agenda, avoiding defamation. The Working Group is brought to you by Gravity Credit Management. When the weight of capitalism is becoming the event horizon of an imploding black hole, call 0800 Gravity, and our team will get blood out of a stone. That's 0800 Gravity. This is The Working Group.
There we go. Kia ora, Aotearoa. This is the Taxpayers Union 2023 Post-Leaders Debate Analysis, coming live from the world-famous Backbenchers pub in the mighty Wellington. Hosted by the Working Group, New Zealand's best weekly political podcast that isn't funded by New Zealand On Air. I am your host this evening, editor of the daily blog, Martyn Bradbury, and I come to you live, New Zealand, standing in the very sacred pub politics space that the great Wallace Chapman once hosted TVNZ7's Backbenchers from. This is holy pub politics space. And if we dig under that floorboard over there, we might find some New Zealand On Air funding. We are never going to get a fucking cent out of this. We are streaming live tonight on the Daily Blog, Facebook, YouTube, and simulcast on Juice TV, Freeview 200. Tonight we do something unique for the 2023 election, a live spin room analysis of the first major TVNZ debate between Prime Minister Chris Hipkins and Leader of the Opposition, Christopher Luxon. Joining me tonight is the greatest political pundit panel in New Zealand broadcasting history. Our first panellist answers the question, what do libertarians and house cats have in common? They both act like they are independent and self-sufficient, but in reality are utterly dependent on a system they can neither appreciate nor understand. Ladies and gentlemen, the Cthulhu of capitalism, the libertarian liquidator, the 132nd most important white cis male right-wing opinion writer at Stuff, Damien All Tax is Theft Grant. Kia ora, comrade. One word to describe the debate.
And let's not forget that there was a story out the other day about what a cat would do the moment that you die. The cat would eat you. And I feel that as a libertarian, I have an affinity for that. So I appreciate that. And I think I'll leave it there.
One word to describe the debate, please, sir.
I think it was a wonderful debate between two centre-left politicians.
Our next panellist is one of Auckland's great champions, a journalist whose empathy, intelligence and compassion are an anathema to Damien Grant, New Zealand Herald columnist and militant cyclist, Simon Wilson. Kia ora, comrade. One word to describe the debate.
One word, better than expected. Is that one word?
Only if you're a National Party MP. Our next panellist is the baby-faced assassin from the right. He has an actual poster of Milton Friedman in his work cafeteria, friend to the forgotten Kiwis who are emotionally attached to their utes. At high school, he was voted most likely to be Draco Malfoy, the Pope of the Taxpayers Union, Jordan Williams.
Thank you, Bomber.
Kia ora, comrade. One word to describe the debate.
Feisty, and I've never seen a debate. First 2 minutes, they were already talking over each other.
Yes, it was disgusting, wasn't it? Our next panellist is the doyen of New Zealand political and business reporting. She is one of the few people I'm too frightened to mock in the intro. She's like Kim Hill, but with fewer confirmed kills. The head of business reporting at NZME, the Right Honourable Fran O'Sullivan. Kia ora, comrade. One word to describe the debate.
Boring.
It was pretty fucking mediocre, wasn't it? And last but not least, he is one of New Zealand's most important political scientists, House of Gryffindor and recreational Jedi Knight, Dr. Bryce Edwards. Kia ora, comrade. One word to describe the debate.
Lacklustre.
It was pretty lacklustre. Okay, let's get into it. Issue 1, is Luxon credible when he's criticising Labour on tax? Damien.
I don't know if he's credible when he's attacking Labour on tax, but he's certainly got a couple of really good hits in the crack about the polytechnics, the district health boards and the 67 water authorities. I think he got some good hits on there. He has certainly come under a lot of pressure from the media about the his failure to release the analysis, but I think that's unfair. He has released his analysis in the 32-page booklet. It's just woefully inadequate. I mean, he's basically saying we're going to get $450,000 off 1,700 house sales. That's his analysis. That's it. It's done. We can all go home now.
Jordan, surely he cannot lecture Labour on their wonky tax details when his whole house of cards when it comes to the foreign buyers ban is just nonsense, can it?
Yeah, I agree with that totally, and what Damien's just said, but it actually doesn't matter. I think what we saw tonight was not dissimilar to the first John Key debate against Helen Clark, where we saw for the first time the leader of the National Party looking very comfortable. There wasn't a single section where you really felt he was on the back foot.
Yep.
He was, all he had to do was get a draw. He was up against someone who's a long-time minister, a career politician. He's a guy that's not been in Parliament yet 3 years. And he went toe-to-toe tonight, and that's all he needed to do. And frankly, I think for a lot of people, he would have ticked the boxes.
Simon, he did a pretty good job, didn't he? All he had to do was stand still and not fall over.
I'm just actually trying to stay upright myself. I'm sitting next to the head of the Taxpayers Union, who I think just said he got it all wrong on the tax and he doesn't know what he's talking about, but it doesn't matter.
No,
You're the head of the Taxpayers Union.
Doesn't matter.
How does that not matter?
And the problem for Luxon is they released that tax policy prior to seeing...
The problem for Luxon is that the numbers don't make any sense.
Yeah,
and you should be climbing down his throat and ripping him apart from the
inside.
inside.
You clearly aren't reading the Taxpayers Union.
Could I go back to
No one is.
Very well.
I want to go back to. I'm going to go back and answer his question now.
No. Damien said very well that it was two centre lefties up there. He can't win on tax because he's not really championing tax relief. He's funding his tax relief mostly with more taxes.
I think
that's not a fiscal conservative.
Simon, isn't the true genius here of National being able to start the foreign buyers debate? And no one's going, whoa, we're removing the foreign buyers ban. Yeah. And rather than going, whoa, we're removing the foreign buyers ban, everyone's going, oh, your tax won't make as much money. That's pretty clever by National, isn't it?
I think you're right, but if there are people in this room who have given money to the Taxpayers Union, you should be asking for it back because your guy is not holding their feet to the fire on tax. This is
on that analysis, anybody who's been giving money to the Herald should help because you have failed to hold this government to account for 6 years. If it wasn't for Fran O'Sullivan, there'd be a down the gurgler.
Fran O'Sullivan.
I know who like what I do.
National.
Both of them love you.
Hey, stop flirting.
Shut up.
Fran.
Yes.
National want to take money away from 2-year-olds. They want to take money from public transport. They want to raid the climate change funds so they can give rich tax cuts to landlords. Will New Zealand go along with that? It flies in the face of very egalitarian values, does it not?
Well, I think we're in a phase where people are past egalitarian values. They actually want to get ahead. And so I thought tonight he actually did a damn good job. I thought he owned the room at the beginning. It was fairly blancmange, but he didn't stuff up, and I think that was important. He got his message out. And we have had the last few weeks, since the defective tax cuts package came out, and I do think it was defective, but this is the first time we've actually heard a lot more about what he stands for. And I think it was great that the debate didn't go for 90 minutes just on the tax cuts package, even though it's really important, even so.
Bryce, wealth tax, Labor refused to do it. That's a major problem, isn't it?
It is, because the left are Labor's losing the left. Who do they vote for? They vote for maybe the Greens, but they don't turn out. It's probably the main problem for Labor.
voter turnout is going to go way down at this election. They're not motivated. Everything's going into the centre. And we just saw that in this debate. I think it was the best advertisement for the minor parties we've had so far on TV. And that's why after this poll, after this debate, probably the likes of ACT, New Zealand First, the Greens will go up.
Martyn, just before you go
Yep.
on from that, I wonder if I could just go back to your
You know
first
you
question
can.
to me, but also I was the one who said this was better than expected, and everybody else said it was tedious and boring and all the rest of it. And I want to explain
No,
why.
I said actually he got his message out. It was boring, but actually
Okay,
boring is
cool.
sometimes good.
Okay,
You want to hear stuff
I want
once
to
in a while.
explain what I meant. I thought Luxon won the first segment, which
Yes,
was on tap.
absolutely.
He came out really strong, he was slick, he was organised, he knew what he was going to say, he was very professional about it, and he got that message through. But as the debate unfolded, I thought Hipkins grew into his points. He started to make zingers. He started to say things like, whānau ora is a very good example of what you're complaining about as co-governance.
Yeah.
People on a minimum wage have had a $7 an hour wage increase under this government. These are zinger lines that actually encapsulate a message, and he got a whole series of those out through the debate. He wasn't the slick operator that Luxon is, but he had a position and he grew in confidence, I think, as that went through. And the big thing about this vote was, everybody's been saying people are disillusioned, people don't know who to vote for, people are turned off, not going to vote, and all the rest of it. I think that's a focused issue around the two main parties, where both of them are doing less well than we've ever seen in our lifetimes.
Right.
The two main parties before.
You have to stop reading Matthew Hooton.
So what,
that's not right.
what that means is that there's a whole lot of people who are not happy to look further afield than those two main parties, because there's lots of choice in this election, right across the spectrum, but they want Labour and National to be better. And that was what this debate was about. I think we saw what National is. I thought we saw Luxon being what he has been on the campaign. But I think we did see a better Hipkins grow through this than we had seen before.
Damien, they touched on...
So just I think an interesting point with that was how good it was for Labour that it was Chris Hipkins and not Jacinda Ardern. Because I think Ardern would have really struggled on that stage defending her record. And I think that Hipkins actually did quite a good job. He went on the offensive on co-governance. He went on the offensive on the Māori Health Authority. I don't know whether he necessarily believes those things, but I think these are electoral liabilities for him. He can't do much about it, but he's going on the offensive, which I think was a wise political strategy.
Damien, they touched on the cost of living crisis, and they mentioned the petrol tax and the increasing costs of food. Didn't really get into it very much. Why do you think both of them shied away from the cost of living crisis when it's such a big issue? Do both of them just acknowledge they can't do anything?
Well, it's interesting if you have a look at that and you think, well, where's the difference? This is not Muldoon and Longy. The contrast here is so small, and as you were saying before, the advantage for the minor parties, if you're looking for substantial differences between National and Labour, you're just not seeing it. And so part of the reason why they can't necessarily articulate it is that they don't have really strong reasons, arguments to tackle the cost of living crisis. And it's interesting that Chris Luxon, they've been banging on about these 14,000 extra public servants. We heard none of that today.
Yeah.
They are not saying they're going to cover their tax cuts with getting rid of redundant public services or any of the other useless waste of government money like New Zealand On Air or the Human Rights Commission. They are planning to do it with new tax increases. The problem is that Chris Hipkins knows he can't do anything about the cost of living crisis, and Chris Luxon doesn't understand the underlying economics that would help him solve the problem in the first place.
Jordan, they talked about leadership. It seems the difference is Chippy is likeable, Chris Luxon wants you to like him. Is that enough?
That was true 6 months ago, but is no longer true.
What did he say to you when you parked up next to him with the debt clock?
There's some very good... but they were a bit sore on that. The polling would suggest, and we track this,
Yep.
that actually
the electoral anchor that Labor were trying to paint 6 months ago, that shoe just does not fit anymore. We've got currently a leader of the opposition that is level pegging a sitting Prime Minister and preferred Prime Minister. That is very unusual.
Yeah.
That is actually, it makes the opposite point.
Both very low.
That's true. But then this isn't quite, Simon said, this is the election for the small parties. We're still not in the 2002 sort of levels. So coming back to the point, Hipkins did a very good job. In fact, it shows his political experience that he could do so well tonight defending what is an abysmal record that he inherited.
Well, let's talk about
Chris on the other side, Christopher Luxon rather, on the other side, he's got a real problem too, because he talks about wasteful spending, he talks about the extra 16,000 bureaucrats, but the National Party and his advisors and Luxon are so terrified of saying the other side, well, we're going to get rid of 15,500 of the 16,000, because they know Labor's only pathway back in is a 2005 style scare tactic of don't put it at risk, these people are going to cut. Now that pre-fu last week, whoever's there is going to have to cut. It is, the baked-in assumptions in that pre-fu to get back into surplus actually result not in real decreases in health and education, but in nominal decreases of those votes. It was laughable tonight to see them both saying, we promise that they will go up every year. Well then, that's not what Grant Robinson told Treasury to bake into the books.
Simon, it was interesting watching Chippy step up and actually defend Labor over COVID, actually pointing out that we had to do some hard decisions, we made some big calls, 6,000 lives saved. COVID stands over the entire election, but no one's talking about COVID at all because they're so sick of COVID, right?
It's a remarkable thing no one's talking about it, and I thought Hipkins was very good on that. One of the things he didn't really stress, but I think it's worth remembering, is that in the whole process of all that enormous extra borrowing that the government undertook to get us through COVID, they were actively supported by business throughout, who wanted more. They were actively supported at every step of that borrowing by the National Party as well. This was not something that Labor did going out on a limb. It was orthodox around the world, supported by National, supported by business, and now Nicola Willis has the nerve to say, look at the enormous increase in debt and not remember that. I find that astonishing. I don't think it's right to say there's very little difference between these parties. If you look at things like industrial relations, the fair pay agreements, the minimum wage, a range of things there which have been significantly different between Labor and National. If you look at their approach to climate, National relies heavily on the ETS, and as Hipkins said in the debate, what that will mean is enormous price rises for everything that has petrol in them. And everything that has petrol in them is everything.
Fran, where does leadership come into this when you've got two people who are so bland?
Well, I thought what was really interesting was how they agreed on so many things in the short answers. And I did find myself wondering if Chris Luxon wins the election, what job would he offer Chris down the track? In much the same way as we saw with Michael Cullen when John Key won. I think there were two people that underneath would have some commonality. I think they're both actually quite conservative.
Yep.
I don't feel that Chris Hipkins is in any respect a radical. I don't think he's pushed the boat out. He's been an abysmal manager when it comes to education reforms. He was no great shakes and police. And he went too far in COVID right at the end when he came into that. He didn't listen to what business and others were saying in that. We want to buy our own rat tests. We want to look after our people. You know, the state just climbed in, pushed everyone back. I think we could have come out of that far faster if they had actually embraced business at the end.
Bryce.
I don't think business was being in any way, kind of oppositional to the government. They wanted to help and they were helping. They were actually the ones that got around Jacinda in the first place and persuaded her we had a problem.
Yep.
She didn't lead it. Everybody else did at the start. So I think, give people a shake on that.
Bryce, National and Labor vote 70% of the time together on the same pieces of legislation. They agree all that time. What is the actual difference between Luxon and Hipkins this election?
One of them has a lot more hair. But
Has here.
Well, okay, I'll be more serious. One has a red tie, one has a blue tie. No, I mean, there are differences clearly between the two, but within the bigger picture, globally, historically, they're fairly minor. And so, regardless of what government forms after October 14, there's going to be a lot of similarities of outcomes, and it's all going to be pretty grim, I think, it's going to be gloomy. And we saw that from Prefu, and we saw that, both parties are going to have very similar fiscal outcomes. Yes, we will argue about the different tax plans, which are pretty rubbish on both sides, but I don't think the voters really care about that in the end.
No.
I mean, Bryce,
No,
just
I don't think so. I think they want to actually see some leadership and some optimism and some momentum.
Well, we're living in a post-truth time now.
It's got nothing to do with post-truth.
It really is.
So, Bryce, I just want to pull you up. So, because I agree, I think that we are going to see very little difference fundamentally, regardless of who wins. But the counterfactual to that, which I know Martyn keeps raving on about on his random little blog that only him and his mother reads, and Simon
and Marxists.
And if you've got a government that is supported either by ACT or the Greens into Party Māori, aren't those anchors going to pull either of the governments in a very radical direction, which could mean that you and I are wrong, which I know is unpalatable, but...
Well, certainly that's MMP, and what most people are assuming is that National are going to go into a coalition with ACT, and ACT will pull them to the right. I think you're absolutely correct about that. But a lot of National insiders talk about how they don't want to be in a coalition with ACT, and for that very reason, they want to get New Zealand First into coalition. They want to even talk to the Greens.
The relationship between National and ACT is completely different from the relationship between Labour and the Greens, where Labour and the Greens clearly can work together because they've done that.
Yeah.
National and ACT, untried and clearly big problems.
Damien, we had an oddball question out of nowhere. China, which was on China. Should we go to war with China if China invades Taiwan? Your thoughts?
Well, I think.
With what?
I think we need to.
The question is what would we do?
One frigate.
It's great.
No.
Don't give us a
We
break.
need to go to our ambassador to China, Sir John Key, and we need to ask. Oh no, sorry, he's the Chinese ambassador to New Zealand. I get it so confused. So we'll ask Sir John, and he'll give us the answer.
Jordan, are we going to war? Are we going to war, Jordan?
No.
Simon?
No, we're not going to war, and I just want to speak out in defence of Prefu, because it's an easy and, I think,
Let's come back to that. No, we're not going to war.
Prefu.
China,
We're talking about China.
we'll come back to that.
China, we'll come back to Prefu.
Recession is likely to be over. Inflation is falling. Unemployment is low. We have low debt levels internationally. Prefu confirmed all that.
Agreed.
Look,
China.
I've seen a lot of people hassling Jessica Much for asking that question, like it was a bad question and that they shouldn't answer, and they answered it very well according to, I think, everyone. But I disagree. I think it was a great question, and it is one that New Zealand's going to have to face.
Yeah.
There is going to be a question of New Zealand siding with the Western allies or remaining neutral. And there's going to be a lot of pressure. And
Damien,
can I jump in
there?
Unless there is actually war, I don't think it matters too much, because if you look at the bare statistics, US is doing more trade with China than ever in its history. So let's just think about the big picture and let's just follow the money.
Damien, the reference...
why
Fran
this
and I
won't
agree
happen.
with.
We will throw
That'd be a change.
Damien, the Chris Luxon kept using the coalition of chaos to describe Labour, Greens and the Māori Party. Surely the alternative of ACT and National is the alliance of arseholes. I understand that Winston Peters is with us here tonight in the pub, and maybe he might add whether or not he would be joining them. I don't know. But do you think the alliance of arseholes works?
I certainly hope it works, and I hope the Alliance of Arseholes gets rid of those 14,000 additional public servants. 16,000. I hope the Alliance of Arseholes does what ACT is promising to do and get rid of all of the schools and turn them into partnership schools. I hope that they bring market discipline to health and education. I am here for the alliance of arseholes.
Jordan, can ACT and National work together when they clearly dislike each other so much?
No, it's so many of the leaks that have come from the current government have come because of dislike between Labor and the Greens. It's really, I appreciate that internal dynamics of any caucus, unless you're in it, it's a fool's game to try to predict because it's often personalities. But we think that we project. I can see politicians in the room nodding. That we think that it is ideological when usually it's as simple as people not getting along. I do just want to back Bryce up on one point though, and it's to defend Jessica, because it astonished me. I spent for the first time enjoyed watching an Australian election last year, and it was amazing the degree to which the foreign affairs and defence were a major issue, and the top sort of forward issues being talked about, including in the advertising and the like.
But not here.
But never here. It's and why not? Is it that, unlike the Australians, Darwin was bombed? Is it that we're so far away we're complacent?
I think it's that, as well as Labor and National having a bipartisan consensus on defence.
That's no defence.
Pretensions of being a middle power, and Australia does. I mean, the classic is when a president of the United States cannot remember the name of who he's thanking for signing up to AUKUS in the first place. I mean, this is the reality of it all. I mean, Australia. All the columnists on the Australian, Greg Sheridan and others, love to be quartered in the White House. They love to be part of the game. The reality is it's a very small country.
Simon, how is David Seymour and Chris Luxon going to work together? There is a perception that David Seymour will leap all over Chris Luxon and get absolutely everything he wants in any post-negotiation. So it's going to be romper stomper over the top stuff. How is that relationship going to work?
I think with a great deal of difficulty. I think it's very obvious that David Seymour and Winston Peters are far more experienced as politicians than Luxon, and far more able to get their way in negotiating situations. And I was interested to hear Damien just now say, roll on the decimation of 15,000 public servants or whatever it was. I thought that was a pretty brave thing for him to say, sitting in Wellington. There are two industries in this town. One is public service, the other is the film industry, and both of them are going to be annihilated if ACT gets a significant influence in the next government.
Fran,
this city will be devastated by that.
Yes, but the rest of the country will be lifted up.
This city.
Read the room, Damien. Read the room. Jesus.
That approach rolled out to every other province and every other city means everybody gets devastated.
I mean, we are paying this city.
You have to have regional policies.
And sucks the life out of the rest of the
Again, read the room, Damien.
Fran,
it's like a colostomy
will
bag.
the yellow quick fox jump all over the lazy blue dog?
No. I think actually the interesting thing to me is which cards that both ACT and also NZ First, whichever is jockeying for being in a coalition, will play with Luxon. There is an issue about the credibility of Nicola Willis, the tax cuts package that she put up. Does her role get traded away for someone else to come in? And I think that's been mooted that Winston might like to be treasurer. Obviously,
just ask him.
Hello, Winston. And David Seymour has also been jockeying for a finance role. It could be that there is some amalgamation of those roles, and which would be a good thing, because you have a situation that potentially, if it's obviously a national-led government, that Nicola Willis will just get henpicked or whatever picked all the way along about that actual package.
Well,
and you need to spread the risk if you're
Can I just jump in? So a question for both Bryce and Fran. So the assumption is that Winston Peters and David Seymour will be able to out-negotiate the National Party. But that's making, in your experience, is that actually true? The National Party has a lot of institutional knowledge They've got a lot of really good operators
Well,
there. I
Winston
find it
Peters has
struggle.
been Treasurer before, he has been Foreign Minister, he's been in Deputy PM and on pretty small cards, frankly. I think he knows how to play them, and I think also so does David Seymour. And David Seymour has actually asked some really credible questions over that tax cuts package. I think it gives Luxon an out, whoever comes to the table, in that you can spread the risk, not just have one person in the finance
Bryce?
portfolio, but several.
Let Bryce answer.
Look, I think we paid far too much attention to the personalities and this idea of chaos between the different coalitions on either side, but we do need to focus on what policy fits between those different parties when they go into coalition. And that's where I think New Zealand does MMP very badly. So we continually have coalition governments where we get policies that are negotiated after the election that we don't know about before. And so, of course, when National last got into government, they got charter schools with ACT. We didn't hear anything about it in the election campaign before.
That's a good idea.
Well, maybe, but we should talk about it before.
All right, so...
let me just quickly finish.
Bryce.
When the Greens and Labour went into coalition, they suddenly had a cannabis referendum that came out after the election. And so we don't actually know what's going to happen if National are in coalition with New Zealand First or with ACT.
We deal with cards we've got.
Well, that's what they keep on saying, but as voters, we need to know a bit more what policies. Well, I don't know.
Okay,
Bryce,
so hold on.
Nicola Willis has said that she will resign as the finance minister if they don't get the tax cuts through. But David Seymour is going to be the finance minister. She's promising to quit a job she won't have.
Well, it's kind of giving him an incentive to. Yeah. So absolutely.
Okay, so they discussed crime. They asked whether or not they felt safe and they felt unsafe. Chippy was very quick, Damien, to point out that 3/4 of those kids who've gone through their particular trial and their wraparound service hasn't gone on to commit crime. Those are the sort of schemes we want, not bullshit military boot camp, surely.
That's a statement.
You can agree with it.
That's a statement. I think Hipkins is on a loser when it comes to crime. For better or worse, it's too little, too late. I am surprised that Christopher Luxon didn't bring up the wraparound services that Bill English was introduced. I think that would have been quite a strong approach, because it's almost as if Christopher Hipkins is now wanting to go back to that policy. And I think that's part of the problem that Hipkins has got. You get the sense he's doing a better job as Prime Minister than he ever did as an actual minister. And it's likely that the election on October the 14th is not going to go his way. And then, is that an opportunity lost? Is he going to stick around to be leader of the opposition?
Jordan, the National wants to ban gang patches in public. There are 8,900 gang members. Where are we going to put them all?
We have this crime debate, Martyn, the way you frame it. We've got 7 other events for that. But let's come back to the MMP dynamics, because I have to jump in here. You only have one of either Winston or Seymour to run rings round if either of them hold the balance of power, because the only real power is being able to push the eject button or the no. And if you can trade off the two against each other, which is what the Nats are hoping, actually that power vanishes. And so it really, whether you want to look at the realpolitik or game theory, or it's just simple negotiation. So it's nothing about the skill, and frankly, if you think that Luxon is a bunny in a boardroom, you clearly haven't met him. But like any Prime Minister, it depends on what those numbers show. But more importantly, it doesn't matter if Winston gets 5 seats or 15. If he holds the balance of power, that's all the power.
I think there's another way to look at this, and which is that under MMP, we all know that 2020 aside, it's almost impossible for one party to form a majority government. We don't expect to see that again. So what we're hoping for, I think, is for a bunch of parties, 2 or 3 or however many, to show that they can form a credible government which will involve some compromise on each side and will produce results. And the disappointment that we've had so much of in recent years with this government and previously is that we haven't been happy that there have been enough results.
Well, we've got none from a majority.
I know, and that's the extraordinary irony of it. Just finish this point. If we had a Labour Greens government in 2020, they would have got more done, and they would have been more popular.
Fran, if we're going back to crime, National wants ankle bracelets on 10-year-olds, ACT wants them on 11-year-olds, and Labour wants them on 12-year-olds. Isn't that part of the fucking problem with this debate?
Oh, look.
Every week.
Yeah. I think we've done that issue to death, Bomber. You've done that in every single one of the political debates.
Bryce, boot camps don't fucking work. Why do we have the largest party out there pushing ideas that don't work?
Because that's the gloominess of the selection.
Yeah.
Pretty grim.
So,
Reality's not always,
hold on, so let's just stay focused. Let's just stay focused on the election. How credible do you think, starting off with Bryce, how credible do you think David Seymour's threat or promise of holding of confidence but not supply, and if he does that, what is the practical implication of that?
Well, I think it was a stupid move because he played a card that he didn't need to play at the stage, and I think what he has done is made people play safe and go back to National, because no one wants to have a situation, post-election where someone's playing around. He could have actually bottled that and used it after.
Do you agree, Bryce?
No, I don't. I think it's entirely legitimate for a minor party to play hardball with their major parties. And I wish other minor parties on the left would do so more often. The Greens, for example, haven't over the last 6 years. And where you've got leverage, they should. And you can have a confidence and supply agreement.
So everyone goes to New Zealand first and National because they don't want to play these games?
Yeah, and that's a legitimate outcome as well.
But you're looking at it through...
Mad.
I was about to say, you're looking at it through a political lens, but there's a big difference between David Seymour and Winston Peters, sorry, Mr. Peters, but Winston Peters and most politicians nowadays, is that David is one of the very few that is actually a conviction politician. And that not since, I think, possibly Ruth Richardson, you've got someone in there that genuinely would turn down the balls of office, isn't motivated by the part. David Seymour is an unusual guy. And so he would be saying that because he genuinely wants to get there to get to the policy ends, not for the sake of getting there.
Can you explain this to me again about David Seymour? Because I get what you're saying, that he's a classic liberal, old school liberal in his economic outlook, and in that sense he is a conviction politician. But this is the guy who has stirred up racial hatred in this country over the co-governance issue. And continues...
Reluctantly actually...
I mean, this is a big issue. You should be able to talk about it without you...
Go Fran. Go Fran.
Let Simon answer.
Let me answer. Thank you. Let me answer. Okay, so let me answer. No?
You don't need to spray racism around.
Could I answer?
So, Simon, answer that question.
I get the ACT Party emails. Every time when they say we've done a survey of our members, they tell me 36% or thereabouts of our members say the biggest issue in this country is co-governance. And I can tell you, I know from every other poll, every other survey, that with the exception of ACT, New Zealand First and the fringe parties outside on the right, everybody else thinks the biggest issue is the cost of living. Absolutely, it's the cost of living.
Fran,
this is nonsense.
Are talking about co-governance as being a big issue.
My point was that David Seymour, while a conviction politician on economic, I did. While being a conviction politician on his economic
You
grounds,
are stopping the role of a media, which should be to debate the stuff without slinging labels around.
Okay. So I haven't managed to finish a sentence in this.
Well,
all right,
usually
so
do.
Simon, finish your sentence.
Thank you.
Defend your position.
Thank you. On issues of gun reform, on issues of co-governance, on issues of a whole range of things like that, David Seymour and the ACT Party have been very happy to say this is where we're going to stand to mop up the discontented disgruntled, angry votes of people who just think the world should be completely different. And he's done very well at that. He's extremely clever at that. But to call him a conviction politician, I think he is the triumphant opportunist in this election. And he's been so successful at it, he nearly destroyed Winston Peters' vote, and Peters has only just started to get it back.
Let me ask you a question. So, and I say this because the Taxpayers Union have debated this more than anything else. Three Waters was bloody hard. The issues around co-governance and the replacement to the RMA, incredibly hard. We had the advantage that we could lead with the economics, but you might consider us fringe. We're the largest centre-right group. 1 in 16 voters subscribe to our emails. Our surveys show our people are most concerned about this. I personally, I sit at the Taxpayers Union because I hate the idea of New Zealand being poor. I don't want to make the compromise for my kids. But I consider the biggest threat to our long-term prosperity is dividing us and our rights based on race. And that's my genuine feeling. I hope you'll take my word for that. I think that is our biggest threat to our long-term prosperity. David has reluctantly taken this issue, because you remember when he became leader, he shunned Don Brash, said, really, piss off, I'm not interested in those issues from old white men. He's embraced it because he would be hearing what we are hearing, and he's probably, like me, concerned. Do you consider me, use the word racist, do you consider my genuine concerns there racist? Do you think that us travelling the country...
Simon, you need to answer that question.
Thank you. I do want to answer it. And I want to answer it by quoting what Chris Hipkins said, because I think he was right on this. If you want to say that services, welfare services, health services, education services in this country should be supplied to people on the basis of need, then you have to recognise that Māori in this country have not been supplied in commensurate with the needs they have. And it's not because, for some reason, it's not because health services are just not available to Māori, it's because, as Hipkins said, Māori use health services less and later than other people,
Simon,
and that is the principal, simple reason why I have answered the question.
No.
If you are going to recognise that Māori are lagging behind in every health statistic in this country, then you have to have a policy.
What about?
So Simon,
Let's continue with health and education.
We need. It's a
You
yes.
don't want to hear it.
It is a
Is
yes
that what
or no.
it is?
It is a yes or no question. Is Jordan Williams a racist because he does not agree with co-governance? Is Jordan Williams a racist? No. Okay. All right. So if Jordan Williams isn't a racist, what about all of the other people? They're not racist either, because you cannot, sir, you cannot turn around to somebody and say, because you disagree with me on this issue, ipso facto, you must be a racist. The people who are stirring up racial hatred are the people who go there and infer from somebody's political views malice. And that, sir, is wrong, and you shouldn't do it. You're a member of the Fourth Estate. You should do better.
Thank you.
Now, Martyn, you can continue.
I don't know if you're going to want to hear this, but I've talked about this with a lot of people who are not professionally involved in politics, and what the conversation, not always, absolutely not always, but what the conversation often gets down to is, haven't they gone a bit far? Haven't they got too much? How much are they going to take? How long do we have to put up with them?
Well,
And that is racism.
You're talking about the Public Journalist Interest Fund.
Racism. Yeah, I didn't call you a racist. I explicitly said you were not a racist.
Okay, so Fran, my comment, and then back to Martyn.
Gavin Ellis, former editor-in-chief of the New Zealand Herald, had a column today, and he put it out on his Nightly Views, which comes out weekly. He talked about why is the media too scared to air differences in views in society? Why do they slam people who have a different view on something like co-governance? A whole range of issues that aren't talked about, including gender, you get it, the whole things. And not just media, but also what's happening in society, for instance, with the Listener 7 and others, where, you know, a bunch of quite disgraceful scientists tried to run them out of the Royal Society. There is something pretty damn evil in the society at the moment that stops us from discussing civilly without trying to cancel people, label them as racist, TERFs or whatever. And this has got to stop, and we need to actually smoke it out and move on.
So, Martyn, back to you.
Bryce, both Hipkins and Luxon guaranteed no cuts to health and education. Are they lying?
So we're moving on from the culture wars?
We're moving on.
Trying to.
Okay. They are misleading, because you cannot have those types of cuts that they're talking about and not lead to reductions in public services. Simple as that.
Simon, mental health. We have had major problems forever with this. You could give Labour a red van, call them Pat, and they still couldn't deliver. What the hell is going on with mental health?
Well, that was a good line. I think we should acknowledge that. That was a very good line.
Thank you.
What did Hipkins say? Hipkins said a million services, or a million call-out, a million...
Anyone who uses those services knows how bloody underfunded they are.
And I don't know how to take that number. I give it... I think National's policy of having a Minister of Mental Health is a good one.
Right.
I think that's something that they've got right. And Matt Ducey, who is their guy on that, now he's clearly, along with Chloe Swarbrick, they are the two people in Parliament who lead this, absolutely lead this.
Jordan, when are we going to get a sugar tax? Because surely the dirty, filthy big sugar, shouldn't they be punished? Shouldn't they?
Well, unfortunately, the evidence is that the fatties just eat more pies or donuts rather than that, and substitute. But look, the silliness... No, it is. Absolutely it is. The silliness, though, that of tonight's debate, that the government now spends 60% more, we're not getting better public services, you know, and Luxon's pitch is we will deliver better public services and manage better and put in place benchmarks, all that sort of thing. And then the next part, it's don't worry, we're not going to spend less, because we couldn't possibly spend less, and we will measure these things based on and make exactly the same mistake, that how much we spend is how much we care.
They're fiscally incoherent.
Exactly, it is fiscally incoherent, because one of the things that I think is a misperception with, I noticed Simon didn't want the Taxpayers Union mug.
Correct.
I hope you don't turn round, pal. Don't turn round. But one of the misperceptions of the Taxpayers Union is that actually we're a consumer organisation, and that value for money is probably the most important leg of our stool. And that if the National Party returned to that, because it's that matters. There's a proposal the Nats are running about, we're going to send everyone a little summary statement at the end of the tax year and say, how much are we spending of your money on health and education stuff? They're not going to say to you, they're spending $450 for your 15 minutes with the GP.
So Jordan, Luxon will ban cell phones in school, but he won't ban sugar. Why?
No, that policy, and it was so silly, Labor jumping up and down about that. It's just got, all that said, and I say this as a parent with young kids, all that said is, I'm worried about the same thing you are. And
That's the politics of it.
Yep, that's the politics of it.
Something different.
Well, the politics doesn't matter. I mean, schools, is it going to, it's clearly not going to do any harm. I mean,
Bryce, there was a discussion on affordable housing. It seems affordable housing is like good cancer in that it doesn't exist in New Zealand anymore. What are they going to do about affordable housing? Labor says that, well, the 100,000 Kiwi build was a joke, and apparently if we remove the foreign buyers ban, it's all going to be good under National.
I think it's one of the disappointing parts of the current election campaign that housing's not really up for debate. We've kind of accepted that it's failed, Kiwi Build's failed, let's just move on. It's sort of the disappointing part. And
Fran, the National have taken millions in donations from the real estate pimps, and in return are going to throw tenants out onto the street and lift the foreign buyers. Should National just be called the landlords
I
party?
don't think there's many tenants in the 2 million plus side of the market. Of course they're going to make a fistful of cash because they'll be marketing internationally, and the percentage on a sale of 2 million plus is quite good. But I think one of the things neglected is actually in Auckland, a lot of those houses are around 2 million, and I think it will push up price of houses. It'll actually work well for the base and people who'll get the wealth effect, and also with the impulse from immigration. So if you're sitting on that side of the fence, it's going to be good.
That's the homeowner side of it.
Yeah, the homeowner. But you know, how many tenants are in those major houses anyway? If you're actually trying to save money, you're not going to be sitting in a $2 million house and paying rent on that. So, you know, but it will have an effect.
Tax the
on
ghost
overall-
houses. I'm glad we heard.
on the
I'm glad we
overall
got that.
market.
I'm glad we got there. Climate change, Simon. The first emissions scheme was, of course, mooted by Helen Clark in 2003. The National drove a bloody tractor up Parliament steps and everyone freaked the fuck out. They have been able to postpone any serious change for 20 years. 20 fucking years and nothing's changed because the agricultural muscle has so much power in this country.
20 more to come. 20 more to come.
National's going to give them another 5 years. So that's quarter of a century of doing nothing. Thoughts?
When people were talking before about the big issues that were not really being talked about in this election, we were talking about that in relation to China. China's not the only one. Climate change is clearly another one. And the threat of another pandemic or another major health crisis is obviously one as well. El Nino, if you've been doing any reading, will increase this country's likelihood of infectious diseases being brought here by insects. We're talking about malaria, dengue fever, and diseases like that. This is going to change who we are as a country. We're not talking about those things, not talking about climate. In the year in which we've had the hottest July on record, as Jessica Mackay said, and we've had Cyclone Gabrielle and the storms in Auckland, I can tell you, I know those storms have been devastating here. It is extraordinary what they've done in Auckland. There are parts of Auckland now that are still underwater. The Domain Park in Auckland is so supersaturated, it's a lake. And that's an extraordinary thing. There is no... The guy
Could we
who
just
runs-
come back to the debate? I mean,
What?
the question is anybody going to change their vote over that, Simon?
We are not talking about the really big threats. And the problem with that in electoral terms is that everybody's policies, everybody's fiscal policies make no sense at all.
Okay, nobody cares about climate.
If they do not have a contingency
Nobody
for
changes their vote on
emergencies.
Jordan, Jordan, emissions have gone down, as Chippy pointed out, emissions have gone down 3 years in a row. Why does the Taxpayers
Thank
Union
goodness.
hate the environment so much?
Bullshit. The ETS, which we've got an ETS, European style. Yep, it doesn't apply to agriculture, and that I'm going to introduce you to something, Simon. Reasonable minds can differ on that issue. Reasonable minds can differ, but what the Taxpayers Union position is like what the UN says. When you've got a comprehensive ETS that finds the cheapest way to reduce emissions, the government coming along and going, and I'm sorry, Simon, but so we're going to pay for your electric car. Well, that sounds pretty good. That's going to reduce, and you hear Megan would say it's going to reduce transport emissions. Reduce transport emissions. But you take that emission out for transport and you make the credit available somewhere else because it's a fixed cap. And all the Taxpayers Union, you may say hating the environment, but you know, those chaps at the UN that say if you have a comprehensive ETS, get the politicians out.
Thank you, pundits. We must wrap the show. We must wrap the show. Who won and how does it impact the election? Damien.
I think Chris Hipkins actually demonstrated what a fantastic leader of the opposition he would have been. I think Chris Hipkins defended a terrible, terrible record. Chris Hipkins did better than what I had expected him to do, given the cards that had been dealt. But ultimately, I think all Chris Luxon had to do was turn up and not fall down, and he exceeded that considerably. So in terms of the election result, I think Christopher Luxon has vastly increased his chances, unfortunately, of leading New Zealand the continuation of Helen Clark's administration.
Jordan, who won and how does it impact the election?
Luxon just had to look credible tonight, and he did. And I do think what we saw tonight, even compared to 6 or 12 months ago, was a very different, much more confident Chris Luxon. He knew that he didn't have to convince Simon, he didn't have to convince me. He had to talk down the camera to the median voter. If you care about the issues Simon cares about, or you care about the issue I care about, you're not who he was talking to. And he came across confident and credible. That's all he had to do tonight.
Simon, who won and how does it impact the election?
I agree with everything Jordan just said, but I also want to say that I think
unlocked.
Hipkins showed that he's in the game, and I don't think everyone expected that, and therefore, I would call him the winner.
Fran, who won and how does it impact the election?
Oh, I think Chris Luxon, head and shoulders, he was totally in the game tonight. Absolutely fluent, came out, didn't overplay his hand. I think he looked like a professional and potentially very competent Prime Minister to me.
Bryce, who won and how does it impact the election?
Well, I think Mary Lambie, the coach, whoever was coaching Luxon earned their money tonight, big time, probably deserves a big raise. But no, this won't affect the election. I don't think any votes would have shifted as a result of that 90 minutes of television. I think probably most people turned off and went to Shortland Street instead. But yeah, the winner in the end is probably, maybe the minor parties. It was a good advertisement for them rather than the two bland guys. But really, the status quo won.
Martyn,
My thoughts were
thoughts?
that it was very, 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 very clear victory for Jessica Much. She should be the Prime Minister because she was way better than those two chumps. Comrades, that's the show. Thank you for tuning into this most important of civic duties, which is to vote. In an age of disinformation, misinformation, and apathy, our democracy needs engaged voters and citizens like never before. Our thanks to Simon Wilson, Fran O'Sullivan, Dr. Bryce Edwards, Jordan Williams, Damien Grant. You can give them all an applause now.
And let's not forget
Gravity Credit Management, the Daily Blog, the Working Group, the Taxpayers Union, Courier Polling, Slipstream Media, and Juice TV Freeview 200 for bringing this evening's post-leader debate analysis to the live stream masses. We will see you 7 p.m. next Tuesday for our live Auckland Central debate with unique polling. Will Chloe Swarbrick hold her lead? Find out next week. From the palatial Backbenchers Bar in the mighty Wellington, Kia ora and ka pai, New Zealand, you say classy Aotearoa. Good night. Comrades. Thank you. Oh, thank you. That's so kind. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Sweet? Did it go sweet? Oh, thank you. No problems? No, it's... Fuck.
That was New Zealand's greatest weekly political podcast, The Working Group. Not 1 minute of this show was funded by New Zealand On Air. No creamy public broadcasting money for us. That was The Working Group.